You do not win a war by defending. Not in 1863. Not when you've lost battle after battle for 2 years. Not when the enemy has marched into your territory and threatens your capital. The Confederacy's Army of Northern Virginia, led by General Robert E. Lee, has spent 2 years proving this rule with devastating effectiveness. Manassas, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, 3 massive Union defeats. 3 times the Army of the Potomac attacked Confederate positions. 3 times Lee's forces repelled them, inflicted catastrophic casualties, and sent the Union Army retreating back toward Washington in disarray. The mathematics are brutal. Lee has won nearly every major engagement. His army is smaller, 75,000 men, versus the Union's 95,000, but it doesn't matter. Superior tactics, aggressive maneuver, and audacious risk-taking have made the Confederate Army seemingly invincible on the battlefield. By June 1863, the strategic situation is dire for the Union. Lee has invaded Northern Territory, Pennsylvania, threatening Harrisburg, Baltimore, possibly even Philadelphia. The Confederate Army is operating on Union soil, foraging from Union farms, striking fear into Union civilians. This is supposed to be impossible. The South is the one being invaded, blockaded, strangled, yet here is Lee, deep in Pennsylvania, dictating terms. The conventional wisdom among military strategists is clear. The side that attacks usually loses. Defensive positions, fortified lines, high ground, prepared fields of fire are nearly impossible to dislodge. An army defending a strong position can inflict 2 or 3 casualties for every one it suffers. This is why Lee keeps winning. He chooses his ground, fortifies it, and makes the Union attack him. But in late June 1863, Lee makes a decision that will reverse everything. He decides to attack, to abandon his defensive advantages and assault the Union Army in open battle, to bring the war to a decisive conclusion through one overwhelming offensive victory on Northern soil. His target? A small Pennsylvania town called Gettysburg, a crossroads of no particular strategic importance except that it's where the 2 armies happened to collide on July 1st, 1863. What Lee doesn't know, what he can't know, is that the Union Army is about to do something it's never done before. It's about to defend, to hold high ground, to make Lee attack fortified positions, and one Union officer, a college professor from Maine who barely knows how to command troops, is about to fight the most desperate defensive action in American military history. His name was Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. 34 years old in July 1863, a professor of rhetoric in modern languages at Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine. No military training, no combat experience before the war. He'd spent his adult life teaching Greek, Latin, and public speaking to college students. When the Civil War began in 1861, Chamberlain requested a leave of absence from Bowdoin to join the Union Army. The college administration was reluctant. Good professors were hard to replace. But Chamberlain was insistent. He believed in the Union. He believed slavery was a moral abomination, and he believed educated men had a duty to fight when their nation called. The Army commissioned him as Lieutenant Colonel of the 20th Maine Infantry Regiment in August 1862. He learned military tactics from books and from watching more experienced officers. He learned leadership by leading. By September 1862, he was commanding troops in combat at Antietam. By December, at Fredericksburg. By May, at Chancellorsville. What made Chamberlain different wasn't military genius. He was still learning. It was his ability to inspire men. His speeches before battle were legendary. He didn't talk about glory or honor. He talked about why they were fighting, about preserving the Union, about ending slavery, about duty to future generations. His men followed him because they believed in him. By July 1863, Chamberlain had been promoted to colonel and given command of the 20th Maine, 358 men, most of them farmers and fishermen from rural Maine. They'd fought in 4 major battles. They'd lost men,
They'd seen friends die, but they trusted Chamberlain. When he gave orders, they obeyed. July 1st, 1863. The 20th Maine is marching toward Gettysburg as part of the Union Army of the Potomac's V Corps. They're exhausted. They've been marching for days, pursuing Lee's army as it moves through Pennsylvania. They don't know a battle is starting. They don't know that Union cavalry has encountered Confederate infantry near Gettysburg and a massive engagement is beginning. By the evening of July 1st, Union forces have been pushed back through Gettysburg town. The Confederates have captured high ground north of town. But south of town, the Union still holds a crucial ridge, Cemetery Ridge, and two hills at the southern end of the ridge, Cemetery Hill, and a smaller, heavily wooded hill called Little Round Top. The Union commander, General Meade, recognizes the strategic importance of these positions. If the Union holds the high ground, Lee will have to attack uphill. If Lee captures the high ground, he can position artillery to bombard the entire Union line. On July 2, 1863, Meade orders reinforcements to defend Cemetery Ridge and the hills. V Corps, including the 20th Maine, is positioned on the southern end of the line. Specifically, Chamberlain and his 358 men are ordered to hold Little Round Top. The orders are simple. Defend the hill. Don't retreat. You are the extreme left flank of the entire Union Army. If you break, the Confederates can flank the entire Union line and destroy it. Chamberlain looks at the hill. It's steep, rocky, heavily wooded, good defensive terrain. But there's a problem. His regiment is alone. No support on his left, no reserves behind him. If the Confederates attack in force, 358 men will have to hold against thousands. The colonel turns to his officers. We hold this ground, whatever comes. What's coming is the Confederate Army's best assault division, Major General John Bell Hood's division, including the elite Texas and Alabama brigades. Veterans, aggressive, experienced. Over 5,000 men advancing toward Little Round Top with orders to take the hill and collapse the Union flank. July 2nd, 1863, 4 p.m. The 20th Maine takes position on Little Round Top. Chamberlain places his men in a defensive line along the hill's western and southern slopes. He tells them to find rocks for cover, to prepare defensive positions, to fix bayonets. Then, they wait.
At 4:30 p.m., Chamberlain hears it. A sound like rolling thunder from the south, artillery, then musket fire. Thousands of muskets firing simultaneously. The Confederate assault has begun. He can't see the enemy yet, the woods are too thick, but he can hear them. Shouts, officers giving orders, the crack of branches as thousands of men advance through the forest. Chamberlain orders his men to hold fire. Wait until you see them. Make every shot count. At 4:45 p.m., the first Confederate soldiers emerge from the woods, the 15th Alabama Infantry Regiment, 400 men advancing in formation, rifles ready, moving uphill toward the 20th Maine's position. Chamberlain gives the order, fire. The 20th Maine unleashes a volley, 200 rifles firing simultaneously. The sound is deafening. The Confederate line staggers, men fall. But they don't retreat. They return fire and keep advancing. For the next hour, the fighting is relentless. The Confederates attack. The 20th Maine fires, reloads, fires again. The Alabamians fall back, regroup, attack again. Each Confederate assault pushes closer to the Union line. Each time, the 20th Maine drives them back, barely. Chamberlain moves up and down his line, encouraging his men, repositioning soldiers to plug gaps. He can see the casualties mounting. His brother, Lieutenant Thomas Chamberlain, is shot on the arm but refuses to leave the line. His men are running low on ammunition. At 5:30 p.m., the 5th Confederate assault hits. This time, the Alabamians reach the Union line. Hand-to-hand fighting erupts. Bayonets, rifle butts, men grappling on the ground. It's chaos, brutal, desperate. The 20th Maine holds, barely.
The Confederates fall back again. Chamberlain takes stock. He's lost over 100 men, nearly a third of his regiment. The survivors are exhausted, and they're almost out of ammunition. Some soldiers have fewer than 5 rounds left, others have none. A lieutenant approaches. "Sir, we can't hold another attack. We need to retreat." Chamberlain looks at the hill below. If they retreat, the Confederates take Little Round Top. If the Confederates take Little Round Top, they flank the entire Union line. The Army of the Potomac collapses. Lee wins Gettysburg. The war might be over. He makes a decision that defies every military doctrine he's ever learned. "We're not retreating," he tells his officers. "We're attacking." The officers stare at him. Attack? With no ammunition, against a force twice their size? Chamberlain explains, the Confederates are exhausted too. They've attacked 6 times. They think the Union line is about to break. If the 20th Maine attacks now, right now, before the enemy expects it, they might break the Confederate assault. "Fix bayonets," Chamberlain orders. "We're going downhill, on my command." The order spreads down the line. Fix bayonets. Prepare to charge. The men look at each other. Some of them are terrified. Some are determined. All of them trust Chamberlain. At 6 p.m., Chamberlain raises his sword. "Charge! Bayonets!" The 20th Maine stands. 250 men, all that's left of the regiment, rise from their defensive positions and charge downhill, screaming, bayonets fixed, running at full speed toward the Confederate line. The effect is devastating. The 15th Alabama, exhausted from 6 failed assaults, expecting the Union line to break, sees hundreds of Union soldiers charging at them with bayonets. It's the last thing they expect. Panic spreads through the Confederate ranks. Some Alabamians fire and miss. Others try to fix their own bayonets. Most turn and run. The 20th Maine crashes into the Confederate line. There's no time for tactical maneuvering. It's pure momentum. The Union soldiers hit the Alabamians like a wave, driving them back, breaking their formation, scattering them through the woods. Chamberlain is in the front, sword drawn, leading the charge. He sees Confederate soldiers surrendering, others fleeing. The entire Alabama regiment is collapsing. Within 10 minutes, it's over. The 15th Alabama retreats. The 20th Maine captures over 100 prisoners and secures Little Round Top. Chamberlain stands at the bottom of the hill, breathing hard, covered in powder smoke and blood, most of it not his own. His regiment has held, against impossible odds, with no ammunition, by attacking when defending was no longer viable. But the battle isn't over. Gettysburg will continue for another full day. On July 3rd, Lee will launch his final desperate assault, Pickett's Charge, directly at the Union Center on Cemetery Ridge. 15,000 Confederate soldiers will advance across open fields toward fortified Union positions. It will be a slaughter. The Confederacy will lose 6,000 men in less than an hour. Lee's army will retreat back to Virginia, never to invade the North again. But none of that happens without Chamberlain's defense of Little Round Top. If the 20th Maine breaks on July 2nd, the Confederates flank the Union line. The Army of the Potomac collapses. Lee wins Gettysburg. The strategic situation reverses. The Confederacy survives. One college professor, 358 soldiers from Maine, a bayonet charge with no ammunition. That's what saves the Union. If you find this kind of forgotten history as fascinating as we do, we'd be honored if you'd hit that subscribe button. We believe these stories of courage and sacrifice deserve to be told, and by subscribing, you help us ensure they aren't forgotten. The fighting continues through July 3rd. Chamberlain and the 20th Maine, reduced to fewer than 200 effective soldiers, remain on Little Round Top, holding the flank. They watch from the hilltop as Pickett's Charge unfolds on July 3rd. They see the Confederate lines advance across open ground. They see Union artillery tear those lines apart. They see the assault collapse. On July 4th, Lee begins his retreat. The Army of Northern Virginia, bloodied, defeated, withdraws from Pennsylvania back to Virginia. The invasion is over. The Confederacy will never again possess the strength to threaten Northern territory. The casualties are staggering. 51,000 men killed, wounded, or missing in 3 days, the bloodiest battle in American history. The 20th Maine alone suffers 130 casualties, over a third of the regiment. But they hold. They complete their mission. On July 5th, Chamberlain writes a letter to his wife, Fanny. He doesn't describe the bayonet charge. He doesn't talk about the men he lost. He writes, "We held. That's all that matters. We held." The strategic impact of Gettysburg, and specifically Chamberlain's defense of Little Round Top, extends far beyond the immediate battle. First, Lee's army never recovers. The casualties inflicted at Gettysburg, 28,000 Confederate losses, represent a quarter of Lee's entire force. The Army of Northern Virginia returns to Virginia depleted, demoralized, and unable to launch another major offensive. For the rest of the war, Lee will fight defensively. Second, Northern morale surges. For 2 years, the Union has suffered defeat after defeat. The public is weary. Peace Democrats are gaining support, calling for negotiations with the Confederacy. But Gettysburg, combined with Ulysses S. Grant's simultaneous victory at Vicksburg, proves the Union can win. Support for the war effort rebounds. Third, international intervention becomes impossible. Britain and France have been considering recognizing the Confederacy as an independent nation. Such recognition would allow Confederate diplomats to negotiate loans, purchase weapons, and potentially secure military alliances. But both European powers were waiting for Confederate military success before committing. Gettysburg eliminates that possibility. The Confederacy will fight the rest of the war, isolated and alone. Fourth, and most critically, Gettysburg shifts the psychological balance of the war. Lee's aura of invincibility is shattered. Union commanders who'd spent 2 years fearing Lee's tactical genius now realize he can be beaten. Confederate soldiers who'd followed Lee with absolute confidence now question whether victory is possible. What they didn't know, what wouldn't be understood for decades, is how close the battle came to a completely different outcome. Military historians analyzing the battle would later calculate that if the Confederates had captured Little Round Top on July 2nd, they could have positioned artillery to enfilade the entire Union line. The Union would have been forced to retreat or be destroyed. Lee would have won Gettysburg decisively. One regiment, one colonel, one impossible decision to attack when defending was no longer viable. That's how narrow the margin was. Chamberlain himself doesn't realize the significance of his actions until months later. He thought he was simply following orders to hold his position. He didn't know his bayonet charge would be studied at military academies for the next 150 years as an example of tactical audacity and leadership under impossible conditions. The Union Army's recognition is slow but inevitable. Chamberlain is promoted to Brigadier General in 1864. He continues to serve with distinction through the war's final campaigns. At the Battle of Gettysburg in June 1864, he's shot through the hip, a wound so severe that
The Union Army's recognition is slow but inevitable. Chamberlain is promoted to Brigadier General in 1864. He continues to serve with distinction through the war's final campaigns. At the Battle of Gettysburg in June 1864, he's shot through the hip, a wound so severe that newspapers report he's dead. He survives, though the injury troubles him for the rest of his life. On April 9, 1865, Chamberlain is present at Appomattox Courthouse when Lee surrenders to Grant. Grant chooses Chamberlain, the college professor turned general, to receive the formal surrender of Confederate arms. Chamberlain orders his men to salute the defeated Confederates as they lay down their weapons. It's a gesture of respect that becomes legendary. But for the rest of his life, Chamberlain will be known for one moment: Little Round Top, the defense that saved the Union. Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain returned to Maine after the war. He was 36 years old. He'd been wounded 6 times. He'd been promoted to Major General. He'd commanded troops in some of the war's most brutal battles. He could have remained in the army. Grant offered him a position, but Chamberlain wanted to return to civilian life. He'd fought to preserve the Union and end slavery. The war was won. It was time to rebuild. He was elected governor of Maine in 1866, the first of 4 terms. He served as president of Bowdoin College from 1871 to 1883. He wrote extensively about his war experiences, including a detailed account of Little Round Top that would become one of the most widely read Civil War memoirs. The wounds he'd suffered never fully healed. The hip wound from Petersburg caused him chronic pain for 50 years. But he lived a full life. He married, he raised children, he taught, he served his community. Chamberlain died on February 24, 1914, at the age of 85. The cause of death was complications from the Petersburg wound, 50 years after the battle. He was the last Civil War general to die from combat wounds. He'd outlived the war by nearly half a century, carrying the bullet fragments in his body until the end. The 20th Maine Infantry Regiment was disbanded in 1865. Of the 1,621 men who served in the regiment during the war, 147 were killed in action and 410 were wounded, a casualty rate of over 34%. The survivors returned to Maine, to farms and fishing boats and small-town lives. Most of them never spoke publicly about what they'd done at Little Round Top. Today, Little Round Top is preserved as part of Gettysburg National Military Park. Over 1 million visitors walk the hill each year. They stand where Chamberlain stood. They imagine the Confederate assault coming through the woods. They try to understand how 358 men held against thousands. A monument to the 20th Maine Infantry stands on the spot where Chamberlain made his decision to charge. The inscription reads, "In great deeds, something abides. On great fields, something stays. Forms change and pass, bodies disappear, but spirits linger to consecrate ground for the vision place of souls." Those are Chamberlain's words from a speech he gave at Gettysburg in 1889. He was trying to explain what the battle meant, why it mattered, why the men who fought there, Union and Confederate, deserve to be remembered. The Battle of Gettysburg was the bloodiest 3 days in American history. Over 51,000 casualties, thousands of families destroyed, a nation torn apart by war. But it was also the moment when the Union's survival became possible, when Lee's seemingly invincible army was stopped, when the tide of the war turned permanently toward Union victory. And at the center of that turning point was a college professor from Maine who barely knew how to command troops but understood something more important: that some ground is too important to surrender, that some missions require impossible courage, that leadership means making decisions when all options are terrible, and the only choice is which terrible option might work. Chamberlain never claimed to be a hero. He insisted his men were the heroes, the farmers and fishermen from Maine who charged downhill with bayonets when they had no ammunition, who trusted his judgment even when it seemed insane, who held Little Round Top because they believed in the Union and in each other. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Every click tells the algorithm this piece of history is worth remembering. We're dedicated to rescuing these forgotten stories from the archives. If you want to join us on this mission, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment with your city or state and tell us if someone in your family served. Thank you for ensuring that Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain and the 358 men of the 20th Maine Infantry Regiment do not disappear into silence. They deserve to be remembered.